point, I'll turn to my guests and ask them to introduce themselves. Then we'll each go down the row and sort of describe what we've been doing the last month or so. And then we'll open it up to your questions. And please do not feel timid. Any question is a good question, especially in this situation. Libya has been a very opaque place for about 42 years. So much so that there were no international journalists in the country when the uprising began. So really any question is welcomed, and we're here to sort of to help. So, Dr. Ali.
First of all, I would like to ask you all to stand a moment of silence for those who died for freedom in Libya. Thank you. I will try to, the few minutes I have, give you what we call like cable notes in the media. I was born in Misrata, Libya, the city that is now under siege, which we call it now the second Stalingrad in Libya. It's been devastated by the military battalions of Gaddafi. And then raised in Benghazi, the hub of the revolution, which has always been the center of cultural and political development, and it is the seat of the Libyan University. And most of the intellectuals and others are really considering Benghazi to be the city with the spirit. It is the microcosm of Libya. All Libyan people from all over the country are there in Libya. If you want to study the Libyan population, you study Benghazi and you have a very good sample. I lived in Benghazi most of my life. I went to school in Egypt for journalism, went back and became assistant lecturer in the University of Benghazi for communications. Came to the States first time, 1969, before the coup d'etat. I got my master's from Stanford and then a PhD program in Iowa City from the University of Iowa. Went there and established the Department of Communications. And because I believe in freedom of expression, which is why I have been studying journalism, I found difficult times to deal with Gaddafi, whom I knew since childhood. We were together in the elementary school in Sirte. And unfortunately, I was the victim of ouster in 1976 from the university. 7 professors were kicked out of the university, but I was the only one who had the honor of being tortured and imprisoned for a while. And then I decided that the place is no more safe for me or for my kids, and I decided to come to the United States. And since 1977, I've been in the States, a citizen with 4 children and 4 grandchildren. And but I have always been, since I came here, a voice of concern of Libyan people's plight for freedom and for independence from the dictatorship of Gaddafi. Unfortunately, he's got the money. He has been spending it for his propaganda campaign. Not many people knew about that the infrastructure of Libya in 2011 is worse than it was in 1969. And even though Libya was 2.5 million when I left it, it's now 6.5 million, but still the country suffers from about 30% unemployment rate among educated graduates of Libya. 6.5 million with so much wealth, and he couldn't even find good jobs for them and good services. He spent most of his most of the money that he receives in supporting terrorism around the world. All of you knew about what he did in Banam, and the victims of Banam are still asking our administration here and the world to take Gaddafi to account criminally, because when he solved the problem, he solved it civil court. He paid money and he thought that the blood money will take him off. He is still responsible criminally, and Mustafa Abdel Jalil, the newly elected president of the interim National Council, said it. He was the former Justice Minister. He said Gaddafi has ordered the bombing of Banam accident. That's the back. And since we've been here, we have worked so much with the American government with the Congress, with the media, to always tell the people about the plight of the Libyan people. But there wasn't much, responses until the Libyan people decided to really take things in their, take matters in their hands. On the 15th of February, let me regress a little bit. In 1996, about 1,287 prisoners of conscience in the prison of Abu Slim, they demonstrated inside the prison asking for better health conditions and better, treatment. Gaddafi ordered them to be shot, and in 3 hours, 1,287 people were killed, and they dug a big grave in the prison and buried them there. From 1996 until 2004, nobody knew anything about this event. The families of the victims used to come and bring gifts and bring food to their beloved ones. The prisoners' guards take it and say, we'll deliver it. But after 2004, it was exposed, and slowly the Libyan people started, their anger to simmer. Started with the weekend demonstrations in the courtyard of Benghazi, and from there goes on and on and on. It was the beginning of the breaking of the wall of fear. And in the 15th of February, the lawyer, the attorney of the families of the victims of Muslim, was arrested. And because he was arrested, the people of the families came to the center of the security administration and requested and demanded that he should be released, because he didn't do anything except defending them. After 2 hours of negotiations, they got the man out, so they celebrated in the city, going in the city of Benghazi, that they have brought the man who defended them. The security forces started shooting point blank, and many people were killed on the 15th of February. The people, the young people like Ahmed and others who were preparing on a Facebook, kind of demonstrations asking for more freedom, constitution, and so on the 17th of February. So this sparked it earlier, and the rest, I think you have known most of it, that most of Libyan cities in the east have been liberated by the uprisings. And in the west, the Zintan city, was independent, Zawiya was independent, Misrata was liberated, so to speak. And Gaddafi was almost shocked. After he regained his, I think, control, or his, he started hitting back. And believe me, we as Libyan Americans knew what it means when the world at large interfered and made the United Nations Security Council 1973 a reality that saved the city of Benghazi, my beloved city, from being slaughtered. That was the night Gaddafi almost reached there. Gaddafi has threatened his people. He said, as his representative in the United Nations say, I either rule you or I kill you. Many ambassadors left him. Many good people inside the country left him, and even his cabinet, which works with him, are now hostage for him in the barracks of Bab al-Aziziyah, his headquarters in Tripoli.
Let's keep the information for the questions. And
well, I'll stop here, and I think I gave you too much to ask for. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ali, and thank you, Ahmed, for, it's really a pleasure to be here with both of you, and it's quite an honor. So, my name is Jen Ziemke. I'm assistant professor of political science at John Carroll University here in Cleveland, Ohio. And I'm interested in this case because of Libya and political science. I studied a lot about some sub-Saharan African conflicts in the past, the Angolan Civil War notably. But I believe I was asked to be on this panel because I'm the co-founder of the International Network of Crisis Mappers. We're really new. We started out at John Carroll here in Cleveland, 100 people in October 2009 after our first conference, and have grown now to 1,500 and growing. So it's a fairly new network. It's very exciting. It's uniting people from all different disciplines and walks of life, from hackers to people working in the UN to military, all sorts of people. And crisis mapping is a new field, a new discipline. It's uniting people that have any interest in sort of the data that can be collected on the ground, the micro level sort of location-based data about what's happening in a specific area, and then how to pull that up in a map, how to visualize it, how to analyze it, how to make sense of it, detect the signal from the noise, so to speak, so that then it can inform back the people that sent the information in the first place, as well as first responders, the humanitarian community, and the like. We first really activated and mobilized as a community after the earthquake hit Haiti in January of 2010. And since then, we've been crisis mapping a number of different contexts. The one, I don't know if you can tag over to the other open. So this is the Libya crisis map. This is the first, what's unique about this map compared with some of the other maps that we've done in the past, like the Haiti earthquake map, is that this is the first time UN OCHA, the Office for Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, specifically requested assistance from volunteer technical community in mapping and monitoring and getting data and helping create this map. So the Office for Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs is really responsible for sort of coordinating the, information for all the different UN agencies that might descend upon a scene. So a month ago, when the situation in Libya was quite different than it is even today, as it evolves every day, we were asked to do this to help them get a better picture of what was going on the ground. What places need what roads are open and closed, where refugees headed, how many, whatever data we could find essentially was the task that might be relevant to OCHA's mission. So if you look at the map, you can see there's different categories. So if you press on any of the categories, it will change color so that that category will be shown. So, or it will change symbol, for example. And if you zoom in, you get a sense of all of the various dots on this map. And you can actually click on any of those to find out what was the original source of information or data that was pulled together. This has taken place because there's lots of volunteers all around the world that are working 24/7, combing the media, trying to get as much data and information to put on the map as possible. So people in almost every time zone working basically on Skype chats and working together using shared spreadsheets and just splitting up the work of looking through everything from Al Jazeera and traditional media sources to combing Twitter, combing tweets, looking at Facebook, and also working with a few contacts that we have on the ground. There's also a way for Libyan voices directly to be heard. If they have access, if they're able to, they can email a certain email address, and then that can, we'll have volunteers there creating a report and geolocating it, georeferencing it, and putting this on the map. And so this is a live map. This is sort of a real-time map or real-time picture of what's happening in Libya at the moment. So there's many folks all around the world very, very with so much care in their hearts. They've never set foot on Libyan soil, but they are volunteers, and they stay up all night sometimes doing as much as they can in the hopes that perhaps this helps. I know there's security issues and other things, but let's get to that at the Q&A. Yeah.
Thank you. So I'll tell you a little bit about myself, and then we'll get to the Q&A. My father was born and raised in Benghazi, Libya. My mother is an Irish, German, Scottish, American mixture. They met in college. And my dad is one of 12 children, all of which, except for him, remain in Libya. So I have a very strong bond with Libya. So when the uprising began, there's a group that formed that I had nothing to do with its formation called the Libya Outreach Group. It's a group of young professionals who are a lot like me, the children of the immigrants that came from Libya to the U.S., but also in the U.K. and other places. And our mission is to, at first it was really just to connect journalists around the world with information from Libya. So as I mentioned earlier, there were no journalists in Libya when the uprising began. So a lot of the information that came out was through connections that my group was able to make with journalists to people on the ground. We also are playing more of an activist role now. We prepare reports for government officials here in the United States and issue press releases and write op-eds and media alerts. And we're also somewhat involved in helping facilitate humanitarian aid. We had a very grandiose project of trying to map all of the hospitals in Libya and create sort of real-time data feeds on what they needed, then realized that that cost a lot of money to create a website that had those capabilities. And we are an all-volunteer group, and so that was well outside of our capacity. So with that, I think you've got a good sense of sort of each of our backgrounds and what we can speak to and what we can't, and so I open it up to all of you for questions. And there'll be somebody with a microphone coming around.
How large is the support that Gaddafi has right now?
In Libya? How large is the support that Gaddafi has?
Well, it depends on two things. He has the militia with him, which is, I think, according to New York Times yesterday and the Wall Street Journal, estimated about 50,000 strong. Maybe some of them were decimated, but still he has got a very strong support. He had also recruited a number of mercenaries. The global company for BR has been working hard to bring him mercenaries from countries around the world, especially from Africa and from Serbia. And if you're talking about popular support, I can attest to it that he doesn't have it, because he has always ruled Libya with an iron fist. And he was the only voice that should be heard. And we always joke about that. He always say that the Libyan people has the authority and has the money and has the weapons. But we say that he himself thinks of himself as the Libyan people. So he has accumulated all of these things on behalf of the Libyan people.
Right. Yeah, and to the point of the control of money, I mean, my family in Benghazi, most are living off of $5, $10 a day. Wow. The wealth of Libya is massive, as has been reported pretty widely.
I didn't hear what you said.
Oh, I'm sorry. To the point of Gaddafi's control of the money, my family in Benghazi lives off of about $5 to $10 a day. And so even though Libya is a very wealthy place, yes.
And that's a well-to-do family. Really, believe me, that's a well-to-do family. There are shanty towns in Libya that you can see even in the heart of Africa.
Mr. Abonamah, you had mentioned that Gaddafi has funded terrorist groups. To your knowledge, are any of those funds, have they gone to Al-Qaeda groups or Hezbollah or just any associations that you know of for your work?
I know for certain that he was supporting the Irish Republican Army. I know for certain he has supported the Red Brigades. He has supported many of the African revolutionary groups. He was supporting Charles Taylor, who is now under the jurisdiction of the International Court of Law. This is just a sample. But he has supported Abu Nidal, the notorious Palestinian terrorists who have done havoc in many of the European airports. And that is just to, I think, the tip of the iceberg.
So you don't know if he's got supported Hezbollah or Al-Qaeda?
No, Hezbollah, I don't think he is, because he once imprisoned and killed Imam Musa Sadr, the Shiite leader from South Lebanon. And Hezbollah is almost like an enemy to Gaddafi. So he won't support him. As for Al-Qaeda, he doesn't support Al-Qaeda per se, but he may use it, and he threatened by using Al-Qaeda, by giving them money and giving them facilities. He claims after 2003 that he is, after 2011, I mean not 2011, after September 11, that he will be supporting the West in fighting terrorism, Al-Qaeda and others. But he has really been funneling a lot of money for many organizations that have been undermining many of the securities of the Western countries and of the African countries.
Thank you.
Hi. Question that I have is that
Based on, if you look at the mainstream media, they've quoted a lot of intelligence sources stating that in Iraq, a significant number of foreign fighters have come from eastern Libya based on ID cards that they found on them. So I think that that's a worry that the U.S. has in terms of throwing its full support militarily behind the eastern rebels. So what kind of guarantees or what could be done to make sure that if the U.S. does throw full support behind them, that we're not going to end up with another, Afghanistan scenario where the guy we support today is going to be against us tomorrow?
Thank you, because that's one of the points that I was talking to, but for asking me this question, it's important. There is now a campaign, a media campaign, making a lot of buzzwords, including this one, funded by PR companies that are really supporting Gaddafi because they have got the money, to throw dust on the uprising in Libya, that they are either Taliban's type, they will establish Taliban type governments, they are Qaeda, pro-Qaeda people there, Muslim extremists, tribal warfare and civil society or civil war between the Libyan, the reality, if you analyze, and I brought some material here from the National Council, the Interim National Council. The leaders of this council are judges, lawyers, professors, and business people. These are people who have really, some of them were working with Gaddafi, but they were nationalists in their own sense. And when they got the chance, they resigned and joined the uprising. The reality is that the Libyan society is a Muslim conservative society. And those people who went from Derna, by the way, the city of Derna, it's the city of my wife. Many of them, because of frustration, they didn't have jobs, they didn't have work, they didn't have any future. So they went out to Iraq and they were recruited by others who know how to recruit, frustrated youth. But in the majority of the cities now, which are from Tobruk, Derna, Baida, Marj, Chahat, and Benghazi and Marj, all of them, they have established what you call civilian governing councils. If you analyze the people who are really making the composition of the councils, you will find the 4 categories that I told you about: judges and lawyers, and they have played a great role in the uprising. Professors and business people and students also. A lot of students joined the uprising because, let's not forget, it was the youth who have ignited this revolution, this uprising, and the youth who are really now carrying the burden of most of the fighting against Gaddafi's militia. But the question is that because of the lack of communications, until today we cannot even communicate with the council in Benghazi. Gaddafi has cut off all communication lines. He was controlling the media, he was controlling the communications, and now the people have to rebuild their own communication systems so that they can even communicate with the outside world.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important question because it's a narrative that has really taken off in the last few weeks. It was sort of in the news at the beginning of the uprising, it died down and has come back. I think Admiral Stavridis, the NATO, U.S. Top commander for NATO, he said yesterday that certainly there are flickers, the quote was, flickers of al-Qaeda in Libya, but when he talks about the leadership of the opposition movement, in his estimation, they're all responsible people with sort of goals that are consistent with American interests. And so really when we're evaluating the risk of al-Qaeda in Libya, I think we really have to look at the leadership. Because if you look at sort of the common people in any country, you'll find that there are people who sympathize with very odious causes no matter where you are. But it's the leadership, it's the people that are going to be shepherding the country from this period of turmoil against Gaddafi to the transition to elections, a written constitution, and sort of free, lowercase l, liberal society. The leaders are really speaking our language. They put out sort of their guiding principles yesterday, and it's about having free political parties, freedom of speech and association, the types of things that we want countries, allies, friends, and especially in the Middle East to believe in. Because I think what we're seeing now is the creation of new power lines in the Middle East, where we've got Qatar, which is a very small Gulf nation who has taken a huge lead in this uprising. They're one of the few Arab nations that has participated in the bombings in Libya, and they're really facilitating the ability of the opposition movement to function as a government and really lead the country to its next phase.
Just to add a few points, and I should say it here, I did not finish it. I really tell you, on behalf of the Libyan people, their appreciation for the role that the United States, France, and Britain has taken in really creating the United Nations Security Council Resolution 1973, which saved Libya from the slaughter, saved at least Benghazi. And there are people now, even now when I was sitting here, are crying for help because 2 cities are now being decimated, Misrata and Zintan, and asking us to call all of those whom we know that they should step up to defend these people. And the Security Council resolution stated clearly that it should safeguard the civilians. And these are civilian people in the cities. Gaddafi is really going into them with tanks, rockets, with all his armament. And the people don't, maybe they have some Kalashnikovs and some rifles, but not more than that. And how can you face an army which is so much equipped with the modern, armament? So please call your senators, call your, representatives, and ask them to do something, because the situation is so dire, and people are crying for help.
My question is, what are the chances that Gaddafi will be toppled? Your opinion on that, and then it's a follow-up basically to what you've been talking about. Knowing Libya's history and the lack of communication, what are the real chances for a democracy to take hold?
Do you want me to tackle it? Okay. First of all, I am a living example of somebody who's aspiring for democracy. I hope that I will see it in Libya before I go to my Mother Earth, before I die, I mean. Now, there is a good aspiration for democracy in Libya, for sure. That is I wish that we could make copies, or at least the website available for the people to see the proclamation of what kind of a country, what kind of a system that the people of Libya are hoping for. The question of being able, I can assure you, that among the composition of the names of the people of the Interim National Council that are released, because most of them are not released from the western side of Libya. You find secularists, you find liberal-minded people, you find judges, you find women, you find youth. The composition of Libya is there. And across the board of all the, the ideological lines. There wasn't any there is no control of any certain group there. And their aspirations is to have a free, democratic Libya. A civil society that can be an asset for Syria, for Egypt and Tunisia, to create among the 3 countries a democratic bulk that will change many dynamics of the politics of the area.
And
Chances of toppling Gaddafi,
yeah.
what do you think about that?
The toppling of him, I'll tell you. You want me, my hunch response? He's done. He's gone. It's a matter of days or weeks. And the world at large, you won't find anybody in the world, any leader in the world, except maybe Noriega or Chavez or Mugabe. These are, the pariahs of the world. They are the ones who might, support him. But the whole world at large, even the African Union, the Arab League, the Organization of Islamic Conference, which the only 3 organizations that may stand with him, all of them, they have really said he lost legitimacy and he should leave power. So it's a matter of the coalition forces helping the Libyan people, not fighting for them, but at least specifying the ground for them. And they can take care of him sooner than later, I hope.
And to the toppling, I think sort of we're seeing some political tap dancing with the language being used by Western leaders. I think they've put their chips in, and there's no way that this is going to end with Gaddafi still in power. President Obama cannot repeat day after day that Gaddafi must leave, and then a month from now allow him to stay. It's just, whether we want to like that or not, or whether members of Congress like that, I think it's just the reality. I think if push comes to shove, we will remove him. As far as the democracy in Libya, I think we're for the first time in the region seeing the Arab people being motivated by their intrinsic needs more than their than the external factors impacting them. I think the desire to live in a free society where they can express themselves and associate how they want and say what they want, have opportunities for jobs and education. I think thanks to Tunis, I think people now actually believe that that's within their grasp. I think up until now, you've had situations like the Israeli-Palestinian conflict really coloring all interactions and all political viewpoints of people in the region that happened to be dominated by dictators who were supported by the previous colonial rulers. So there hasn't been an opportunity, there hasn't been that revolutionary moment in the Middle East that happened in Europe and that happened in this country in the late 1800s or 1700s. Where the people have been able to express themselves and felt confident that they could do so successfully.
Can I add a little bit? Because it's really a very intriguing situation. We are living now what we call the second Arab awakening. The first one is when the countries gained their independence, their national anthem, their flags, their membership in the United Nations, and it stopped there. The form of the state was there. But the state, the society, the civil society, and the society that can build, a government that is responsible, elected and responsible and representative of the people, it didn't happen. For many reasons, it's not the time to analyze it. But now, it's the Arab awakening, and I think I wrote last month, before even the uprising in Libya, that this springtime has come early, because it was January. In Cairo, and January in Tunisia. And let me give you three figures. Tunisia, the whole revolution, gave about 300 murders, 300 victims died there, in a country of about 15 million. Egypt, which has 87 million, lost about 350 murders or dead people in its uprising. Libya, with 6.5 million, and the numbers until today is more than 10,000 victims died. Not to speak about the displaced people. So the cancer of Gaddafi, we call him the cancer. It's really something that is so hard, because for him, he was the state, and to get rid of him was not an easy matter, and it's not an easy matter. But the people, stand up, they rose and they said, it's either him or us. And the Tunisian poet, a young Tunisian poet, whose verse of poetry was the slogan of the Tunisian revolution, says, إذا الشعب يوما أراد الحياة. If people decided to have life, destiny will respond to them. فلا بد أن يستجيب القدر.
I agree with what my colleagues are saying. I would just like to add that back to the question about Al-Qaeda and all of that, we have to remember there's elements of Al-Qaeda flickers, if you want to say, everywhere, including here in this country. But I think we have to look at the American political debate as the one sort of driving that sort of framing of the story in a particular way. And so I think that I couldn't basically agree more with my colleagues and what they've said. So. Thanks.
The UN resolution and the U.S. action has been more of a defensive nature than an offensive nature. The media, because of this, the last several days, has been demanding, or at least requesting, an endgame. In the panel's opinion, what do you believe are some of the plausible endgame situations that will occur?
I can start. You want to start? I can finish.
I'll start if you want.
You start, please.
Okay. So one of the earlier questions asked, where, how long is Gaddafi going to be in power? and what does the end game look like? And I think that I share my colleagues' enthusiasm that democracy is possible in Libya, very likely, and that Gaddafi will go. But my real concern is how long it's going to take, because there's a lot of devastation that's possible between now and that time that he leaves. So the sooner, obviously, the better. But I'm concerned also with how much, and it's sort of a question for my colleagues as well, how many tanks and so on does Gaddafi have in his reserve? You know, does he have a lot of supply and a lot of rogue regimes willing to continue to supply him that? Does anyone have a sense of that? Because I think that would set the stage for how long will he be able to sort of survive. And yeah.
I can, you know, if we read together the resolution 1973, it has some clauses which are very interesting. Let's take first the clause of defending the civilians, protecting the civilians, as a matter of fact. There are so many ways of protecting the civilians, and they are not even being applied, because, as I said, the city of Misrata is the civilians there are being decimated by tanks and snipers. The people, whoever is seen, are shot at, and some of them who were caught are mercenaries. They are not even Libyans. Doesn't mean that the battalions of Gaddafi are not Libyans. They are mostly Libyans from 3 tribes, they said. Even tribe of Gaddafi, Gaddafi, tribe of his ally Magarha, another tribe of ally of him, Warfalla. But he had bought or sought many mercenaries even from Serbia. So to say, that means he didn't even leave Europe aside. The question will always be, defending the civilians will need a lot of military protection. You cannot have an army like the battalions of Gaddafi invade a civil city like Misrata of 500,000 people there without any armament to defend themselves. There is that need that the people of the coalition, the leadership of the coalition, and I think this period now between transiting the coalition from the United States, France, and Britain to the NATO this is a critical moment, and I think Gaddafi is exploiting it. When we see that he is pushing so hard to go back to Jdabia, to go back maybe even to try to go to Benghazi, pushing so hard to pacify Misrata and to pacify Zintan. Just when I was here, a call from Zintan called me that he is 2.5 miles from the city and destroying their oil resources, which is usually the artesian wells. The question will become always, what will be the aid? If they aid the Libyan resistance, the Libyan pro-democracy forces, by no drive, not just no fly. No drive, no fly, no sail. This is almost, it's all together. The Libyan, even though they don't have enough armament, they need to be armed. And I think there is a clause, even yesterday, Secretary Clinton spoke about it, even President Obama mentioned that it is, everything is on the table. And Susan Rice yesterday morning, ABC said, we should think of arming they call them the rebels. It's okay. We don't like the word rebels because we are not rebelling against Gaddafi. We are fighting for democracy or uprising for democracy. Arming them and training them will expedite the removal of the dictator.
I think to the specific question of the end game, I think a lot of it is up to Gaddafi himself. The Italians and Indonesia have sort of called for a ceasefire and for Gaddafi to leave the country. His position is that he's been somewhat open to himself leaving, or at least these are the reports, but his demand is that his son, Saif Gaddafi, assumes his power. Well, that's an unacceptable end to all of this. The son does not fall far from the father. But I think, we can't let perfect get in the way of the good here. I think a good resolution would be him to leave tomorrow, and if he gets asylum and avoids prosecution, then that's fine, because to Jen's point, less people will die. But if he doesn't, then I don't know what the end game is, because he does have superior armaments, and so even with the coalition support, the nature of the support it requires the revolutionaries to engage in the hand-to-hand combat, and they're just not there right now. So I think it is a matter of time. I think he is done, but how quickly he's done is really up to him.
And he's imprisoning our capital, Tripoli, 2 million people there, under siege by his security forces. Even more than 4 people move around the city of Tripoli. In the streets, they could be shot at. It reached to that degree of control.
Do you think it's really up to Gaddafi how long he stays in, or whether it's a function of whether the people of Tripoli are able to rise up by some way, or whether even the international community continues to provide sort of air support and perhaps arming? Because it seems like all of those also play a critical role in what's going to happen in the endgame.
It's a combination of all three factors.
I think ultimately it will be a combination of the three, but I do think in the sort of the immediate term,
the sooner he leaves, the better.
And I think it's up to him. I think because there has been some movement to sort of facilitate his exit from the country and his exit from power. It's really going to be if he's open to the terms that are demanded of him from the Italians. I mean, the Italians, to be honest, have a lot at stake right now. Italy and Libya are very closely linked economically, and so the more quickly the Italians can end this and get the country running again, the much better it is for them. So they are very strongly promoting Gaddafi's exit, and they're okay to find safe haven for him and allow him to avoid any prosecution for any of his crimes that he's committed. We can't forget what has happened before. You know, he's doing what he's doing now, but you know, he's responsible for American and British deaths in Germany and over Pan Am, and he has funded, especially in the 80s. He was really active in the 80s with terrorism. I mean, he is responsible for a lot of Western deaths, and so I do think that people are willing to overlook that to end this conflict.
There are 2 countries, Arab countries, that are still supporting him, Syria and Algeria.
Yeah. Not good company.
Well, both of them are, you know, what's the situation in Syria today and in Algeria? Both of them are ruled by autocrats.
This is a question about the language of the revolutions, and Dr. Ali, you started to address it a moment ago, but it seems that those advocating for change in Tunisia, Egypt, Yemen, Bahrain, they have commonly been referred to as protesters, but when we come to Libya, they're known as rebels. So I'm trying to understand the difference between a rebel and a protester, and in Libya, are we looking at both rebels and protesters?
Thank you. I love semantics. The question is, at the beginning, people start to protest. And this is the beginning of the 17th of February revolution in Benghazi. It started with some protests. 200 people were protesting because their attorney was imprisoned. But the dynamics of the people, when they break the wall of fear, they move from protest to really uprising, to become, you know, a movement, a revolutionary movement, so to speak. And now, if you want to describe the real thing in Libya, it is a revolutionary movement, but it is still a civil revolutionary movement, if we can say that in the language, because most of the people, they just wanted to regain their independence, their freedom, their dignity, which has been lost for 41 years. Before Gaddafi came to power, we used to have a constitutional monarchy, we used to have parliament, we used to have, just in the city of Benghazi, 12 daily newspapers. From 69 to 2011, we have only 1 or 2. And poor papers. I give you another comparison of history. In 1911, Libya was bombarded by the Italian colonizers. In 2011, after 100 years, Libya has been bombarded by someone who claimed to be a Libyan named Gaddafi.
To the semantics of it, I think technically, if you look in the dictionary, the Libyan opposition, they're rebels. all right? But you know, we don't use words the way that Merriam-Webster defines them. We use words in context. And I think the context of the word, especially in this country, it's a more loaded term, and it has sort of negative connotations. When I think of a rebel, I think of a Southern secessionist, honestly. And the Libyan opposition are certainly not Southern secessionists. They're not trying to protect slavery or any other sort of bondage. But essentially the way it works, though, is the Associated Press decided that the Libyan opposition would be referred to as rebels, and so every newspaper in the world refers to them as rebels, and that's the reality of it. And unless you have the ear of the editor at the Associated Press, you're not going to change it.
My name is Ali. I want you please to excuse me for my little English, because it hasn't been a while since I came to the United States to study law at Case Western. Before I came to the United States in 2008, I was a judge in my country, Libya, and I'm from Misrata, the same city Dr. Ali is from. I'm not in a position to ask questions other than answer questions, so I want to just to support what the guests have been said. In the first day the uprising started in my city, Misrata, there were only about 50 people who started the uprising and who started the protesting, and they were against the massacre that happened, that was going on in Benghazi. Some of them were my brothers. And back to the question about whether there is Al-Qaeda in this uprising, I'm positive. I believe that there is no Al-Qaeda, and one day the world will discover that the Gaddafi is lying when he says that there's Al-Qaeda among the protesters. My brothers are either, some of them are engineering, one of them are flying engineering. One of them was killed in one of the peaceful demonstration. He was shot by a sniper, and 2 days later, two of the snipers that have been captured in my city, Misrata, they were women from Colombia. I wanted to add that to the mercenaries that Dr. Ali has mentioned. What does Colombia do in Libya? That's really the illegal intervention, if we wanted to talk about the illegal intervention. Because there are some voices now talking about whether the intervention now in Libya is legal or not. I don't want to talk a lot because I have presented a lot and I have given many presentations about what's going on in Libya. One thing I wanted to talk that in the first day there were about 50 people protesting. The second day there were 20,000 people that's getting into the street to protest. Many of them were judges, and I know them namely. Some of them are my colleagues in my court. Some of them are lawyers. Many of them are students. So there is no way to talk about Al-Qaeda in an uprising. And I believe the people are protesting in my city, Misrata, are similar to those who are protesting in either Tripoli or Zantan or Benghazi. I know most of them. So I hope that the world, especially people here in the United States, believe that there is no Al-Qaeda. There is no way. People there hate something named Al-Qaeda. We don't want Al-Qaeda in my country, Libya. And that's it. Thank you.
Thanks. Just to give the audience a better understanding of what is happening around the woman who was taken into custody after reporting being kidnapped and raped by 15 pro-Gaddafi combatants, can you please explain how Islamic jurisprudence defines rape. I don't know how to pronounce it properly, but I think it's Zina Biljaber. If you could
Amen.
just explain that burden
Yeah,
of proof
yeah,
as well on
definitely.
the accuser, so that we understand what's happening to her right now in the country.
Well, it is a saga of a sad story of many women in Libya. Iman al-Abedi was so courageous. She was a heroine to come and really expose what the atrocities, the kind of atrocities and invasion of basic dignities and human rights of Libyan women has happened with Gaddafi militias and Gaddafi's mercenaries. It happened before in many other places, but she was courageous enough to come in the open and to come where the journalists were there, because if they were not there, we wouldn't have heard about her. She was arrested. They have bribed her father and mother they offered money so that she could be silent. Her father and mother said no. Even her fiancé said no, and we will honor her. This, from the Islamic point of view, anything that the individual has inflicted upon the individual, not by his choice, by force or by something else, he is not liable. He is not guilty of such an act. So what you said, اغتصاب بالجبر, is something in the Islamic law which is not considered something of a commitment of the individual. And anything that the individual does not do by his own willing, he is not responsible for it from the Islamic point of view. And by the way, there was today a demonstration in front of the White House by many women, led by Libyan American women there, in support and solidarity with Iman al-Abedi, the lady or the woman who was of this story.
I have a two-part question. I would like to first address Dr. Jen and compliment you for the project that you're working on. I think it's long overdue and it's brilliant. I wonder if women and the sorts of atrocities that are occurring to them around the world are going to be part of your crisis mapping. If you would address that, then I have a question for Dr. Aly.
Okay. So thank you very much for the question. I know there's a lot of students at John Carroll that are interested in mapping gender-based violence. There's a map called Harass Map that's mapping harassment in Egypt. And there's a lot of new initiatives from people that around the world that think that's indeed a very important thing that could be mapped. But I should also say that, of course, there's a lot of privacy and security implications of such a map. So these things should not be entered into lightly. You need to think about what are the implications of having, a dot on your house that says somebody here is being harassed by their husband, right? I mean, if this was in public space. So all the things about making sure the survivors are also safe and that nobody's put in danger is really important. And to that point, this map is the public version of the map. The private version that's being used by UN OCHA for the Libya crisis map is password protected. The URL is not known. And most of the information here is actually redacted precisely to try to protect people that are on the ground that might be put in any way, shape, or form in danger. Even though most of this information is already in the news, we're trying to be sort of extra careful for those reasons. But as long as those considerations are sort of carefully thought through, then I think there's a lot of ways in which people themselves can tell their story, and they can, with or without a map, get their voices out more and more on YouTube, on Facebook, on Twitter, and I think it's empowering people, and it's one of the important things that's leading to change around the world.
And my second question to Dr. Aly is regarding the interim councils and what percentage of these of women are on these councils, what provision is being made in the interim constitution or position paper that you have. I'm looking around the room and I don't see one hijab. I'm also interested in the rape issue and Sharia law. Thank you.
First of all, there are a number of ladies in the council, and There are 2 points that we can read from the situation report. This is about that the right of every Libyan citizen to vote and hold political office is now being not just espoused, but it's part of the movement. The other one is that a guarantee of equal rights for women in all legal, political, and economic and cultural spheres. And by the way, many people don't know that the Islamic law itself gives the woman equal treatment, except in the matters of inheritance, which has its own issues regarding the responsibility of who is in the family responsible for the financial affairs of the family. But that is another issue. Politically, they are all equal. There are about the people that I know, 3 women. There are women that names are not coming out. And by the way, some of them came to Al Jazeera English or Al Jazeera Arabic, and some of them are not hijabis, as you said. The question is, most of the Libyans consider the issue of hijab is an individual right. To put it on or not to put it on, nobody should interfere in this issue. As far as their role, one of them even is a spokesman for the council. Sometimes I have heard her. And I assure you that in the universities and in the schools, almost 50% of the educated people are women in Libya. And the education in Libya is, it's a small country, it's high. Maybe quality-wise is not that great, but there is some education. We are considered to be next to Tunisia in the field of education. There is some advancement in the status of women, but I think when the society becomes free, with constitution, with the rule of law, equal rights for all, I think there will be a better future for all of us, men and women, because we suffered both. It was not only the women who suffered, men and women both suffered in the country under Gaddafi.
So we have just last point. I'd like to address that question as well. The group I'm involved with, the Libya Outreach Group, I'm actually struck, and it still is very interesting to me that it's largely women, largely Libyan American women. I'm on conference calls, and it's me and 5 other women, professionals, stay-at-home moms, who are really driving much of the work being done domestically to support the opposition. So I think it's an important issue and a good question. And I'm getting the signal that is all the time that we have for this evening. I'd like to thank you all for coming. And also, one point, I don't know if it came across clearly enough. Surely this isn't going to be a perfect process as Libya reinvents itself. And I think a lot of what we talked about was really positive and hopeful. There are certainly going to be hiccups. There were hiccups in the American Revolution and every other revolution since. But I think that with the knowledge that we've been able to gain and the discussion that we've had, hopefully you have a better sense of what are the realities on the ground in Libya and what the aspirations of the people are. So thank you.
Can I, just because of this spirit, one of my, my nephew was wounded and he's now being treated in Alexandria. I was calling to him because there is communication between here and Egypt. He told me the spirit of the people today is completely 180 degrees than the spirit that was during Gaddafi. During Gaddafi, people hate each other. They were not even respected of the law. They were almost like acting like animals, he said. He said he was so amazed with the turn of event of the culture of amity, of brotherhood, of sisterhood, of helping each other. Stories I can tell you amazing. He was telling me, he said, they changed me from somebody who doesn't care about anything to somebody who cares about everyone, and I can give my life again for it. That was the spirit of the uprising.